if it's just inevitable that you're going to get tapped and you're going to get smoked as you're newer to jiu-jitsu and maybe older in age, what are some realistic or good objectives to have?
You have to redefine what it means to win. Winning might mean it took that young opponent that normally gets the best of you, it took him longer this time to tap you. Winning might be that you were able to, the minute someone passes your guard, you were able to get into that defensive structure quicker. And so you look for the micro victories within the overall.
We often talk about the importance of not comparing ourselves to others, but you also mentioned that it's important not to compare yourself to yourself earlier in life.
We remember how we could move our body and what we could do when we were younger. In your mind, you're still that 20-something-year-old, and you just go way too hard, way too intense, and you end up getting injured. But these direct comparisons where you're measuring yourself, your self-worth in terms of them, and even your self-worth in terms of what you used to be able to do, you just have to let that go.
Welcome back to the BJJ Fanatics podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Ford. My guest today is a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu under Roy Didnt. He creates excellent content targeting grapplers over 40 through his very popular YouTube channel called The Art of Skill. He also does seminars and retreats worldwide for practitioners over 40. He calls them the Old Grapplers Summit, and they're doing their next one very soon. He's based in San Diego, where he runs private classes and small groups as well. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to be joined today by Rick Ellis. How are you today, Rick?
I'm doing great, Ryan. I appreciate you inviting me on the podcast. I've been a listener for a long time, so it's always good to be here.
That really means a lot, Rick. Thank you so much, man. I've really enjoyed your content, man. You have an outstanding YouTube channel. I think that you're providing a really valuable service too, because there's so many people in jiu-jitsu that start later in life or who've just aged over time training jiu-jitsu. And they don't always get as much attention as some of the younger guys that are wanting to get out there and compete. There's lots of content for young competitors and things like that. So I think it's outstanding that you're helping the community that I'm now officially a part of myself. I just turned 40 and you're doing it in a great way. So I'm excited to have you here and to hear your story. So thanks for being here.
Awesome. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So Rick, the question I always like to start with, tell us about where you're from originally and what life was like before you found jiu-jitsu.
I divide my life into before jiu-jitsu and after jiu-jitsu because, jiu-jitsu is so transformative. Everybody starts jiu-jitsu because they want to learn a little self-defense, maybe get in shape. But eventually those things are, they become minor. What is more important is, the lifestyle, the camaraderie, all the benefits you get from being on the mat. So yeah, before jiu-jitsu, I was, I've had several careers in the past. I was an audio engineer, a recording engineer in Los Angeles for many years. I became a software developer. I sort of stumbled my way into that realm. I created a software application that became pretty successful for a while. And so I was just, kind of doing my thing. I saw UFC 1 like we all did. And, it's funny, a friend of mine goes, "Hey, have you heard of this thing called the Ultimate Fighting Championship?" And I was like, "What's that?" So I went and watched it, and I knew immediately that I had to learn this art. But in 1993, it's not like there's dojos on every corner. And so that would have to wait. I could have been training with Jean-Jacques Machado back in the 90s because he wasn't too far from where I was living in California. But I had started a new career, and I had a new family, and life was really hectic and busy. And that's, a little bit of a regret in my life that I didn't start quite so early. It'd be about a decade later in 2006 when I started jiu-jitsu under Roy Didnt.
We all wish we started younger. I remember I found jiu-jitsu the same way you did with a UFC VHS tape with my dad. Mm-hmm. And we were in Atlanta, so there was like nothing. But yeah, it took a long time for me to be able to actually start. When did you eventually start jiu-jitsu? How did you find a place to train? How did you eventually link up with Roy Didnt?
Well, Jean-Jacques was about an hour away from me in Los Angeles. And so I ended up starting Japanese jiu-jitsu just because it was around the corner from where I lived. And I did that for a few years. And then we ended up moving to Bend, Oregon. I had started this little software company. It was an internet company, and it allowed us to kind of live wherever. And my ex-wife, back in the day, she hated LA. She couldn't wait to get out of there. So she said, let's go. And so I found out that there was a little group of guys that on Thursday nights would train jujitsu at a little taekwondo facility. And so I jumped in with that crowd. There really wasn't an instructor. There were two guys that kind of knew what they were doing a little bit. One was this MMA coach in the area named Sean Jewell, and he had a background in Sambo and a bunch of stuff. And then there was a blue belt named Jimmy. Now, in those days, you'll recall blue belts were like, whoa, that was a big deal. And Jimmy was the connection to Roy Dean. He had trained with Roy in San Diego, where Roy was living at the time. And he invited Roy to come up and teach a seminar to our little motley crew of guys. And Roy was a brown belt at the time. And he was working as an audio engineer in San Diego. I had been an audio engineer in LA, and we had all this stuff in common. And so he and I hit it off immediately. And he said, I'm thinking about opening an academy when I get my black belt here real soon. And Jimmy and I went to work on him and said, listen, this is the place for you. Do it here. So he got his black belt a few months later, and he moved to Bend, Oregon, and started his school. And Jimmy and I were his first two students.
What kind of audio engineering did you do? Was it mostly music based?
I was, I was a musician growing up, and I spent my 20s playing in rock bands, trying to make it. And ultimately, I didn't, but I ended up going back to school, and I got a degree in audio engineering. Moved to LA thinking I wanted to just work on records, do albums. But I ended up getting an opportunity at this busy studio that was doing music for TV shows, music for film, music for all kinds of projects, some independent albums, but mostly music for other things than just records. And it ended up being a great place to get my start in that industry because it was fast paced and you had to work fast and get stuff done. And yeah, so it was all music. And, my credit list from back in the day includes things like Toy Story and Pocahontas and lots of TV shows, the Highlander TV show, like, a lot of stuff that I got a chance to work on. And I didn't mean to leave that career. I was working on Family Guy at the time, and Family Guy got canceled. This was after season 3, it got canceled, and I was out of a gig, and I had started dabbling in web development and, I was building some websites for my audio clients, and I ended up writing this it was an early blogging tool that I released thinking it was just going to be a side hustle, but it took on a life of its own. And then, I had to make that decision. Do I do this or do I stay in audio? And the upside was much greater to doing the software thing. And again, my wife hated California, so we ended up moving, and, it was serendipitous. I ended up meeting Roy Dean through that process. And it's been, such an incredible relationship with him over the years. He and I are best friends, and it's creative collaborators, creative partners on so many different projects.
That's so cool. Well, now, Rick, obviously we were talking earlier that we all collectively wish we started jiu-jitsu sooner. How old were you when you did start, though? What point?
I was a youthful 41. I was way too old. But what's funny is nowadays you see so many guys starting later in life, and there's a whole ecosystem now of guys discovering jiu-jitsu later in life, and the guys who are 8 years old when they start too. You're getting these young, insanely skilled athletes that are just crazy good, and then you see the older crowd kind of starting. So I was 41, and I was always pretty coordinated. My body functioned pretty well. I had done a little bit of gymnastics when I was young. I was pretty. I was able to execute pretty well. And so, and I hadn't beat up my body doing sports my whole life. So I was relatively intact when I started. So I think that allowed me to progress pretty fast and get skilled relatively fast. And, I used to play a much more dynamic style of jujitsu. Back in those days, I'll go back and watch some footage of me rolling as a blue belt. And, sometimes I impress myself. I'm like, damn, I can move well back then in a way that I really don't play that style of game too much anymore.
A lot of people talk about the hardships of starting jiu-jitsu later in life. Let me ask you a different question, though. What do you think are some of the benefits of starting jiu-jitsu at 41 years old that you might not have had you started when you were 21?
Boy, that's an interesting question, because most of us think, man, I should have started when I was younger. Uh, you know, maybe a little bit more wisdom in terms of how you approach training, because you realize pretty quickly that you can't just break yourself. And you have to really suppress that ego and keep things a little more under control, focus on some of the restorative stuff more. And so I think there's a little maybe more wisdom in how to approach it. But I think on net balance, I wish I had started younger, like most of us.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think another. I'm glad you mentioned the word ego, because that was one thing I was thinking, is that obviously everyone has an ego to some degree, but what I've noticed is the younger athletic guys seem to have a little bit more of an ego sometimes than the older guys that are starting, that have kind of been through life and gone through things and
Mhm.
matured a little bit more in general.
I mean, the ego is always tough. The ego is something that we battle constantly and never really goes away. And there is an expectation of performance because we wear colored belts. Everybody wants to represent their belt perfectly. I mean, I've done lots of videos on my channel on this subject of, how ultimately you're only in competition with yourself, with your old self. But still, uh, we measure ourselves in terms of, did we get the tap or did we get tapped? And it can be really hard because jujitsu brings so much failure for a long time. I mean, failure is something that is just, as I've said before, it's kind of baked into the jujitsu cake. And over time, with skill, that ratio of failing to success, begins changing. But for a long time, you really have to, accept that you're not going to be very good at this art and people are going to get the better of you. And especially again, if you're older, your max heart rate is lower. You can't redline yourself as much. You're just not going to be as effective when you get older. And my biggest piece of advice to athletes of any age, really, but especially the older guys, is don't get too high when you do well. Don't get too low when you don't do well. Every day on the mat, as Roy Dean says, is different. And you're going to have great nights. You're going to have terrible nights. And if you celebrate too much on the ones when you do well, and then you come back the next day and you don't do very well, you're in for this emotional roller coaster. And so the best thing is just, accept that whatever happened on the mat happened on the mat. You're on your personal journey. You did improve, even though it may not feel like it in any given training session. And so you just keep at it and keep that ego under control and realize that, it's all kind of an illusion. It's our own, expectations that we place on ourselves more than anything.
That's outstanding advice. To zoom in on something you said there, you talked about the inherent suffering that you're going to go through when you start jujitsu,
Yeah.
whether you're young or old. What do you think are some, for the older crowd, what are some really good objectives? If it's just inevitable that you're going to get tapped and you're going to get smoked as you're newer to jujitsu and maybe older in age, what are some realistic or good objectives to have rather than winning, air quotes, rather than getting
Yeah.
and tapping people? What's something else they could be looking at instead?
You have to redefine what it means to win. Winning might mean it took that young opponent that normally gets the best of you, it took him longer this time to tap you. Winning might be that you were able to, the minute someone passes your guard, you were able to get into that defensive structure quicker so that you weren't flattened out, you weren't completely dominated that time. And so you look for the kind of the micro victories within the overall uh, struggle there. And so yeah, that's probably how I would answer that. Redefine what success means. Success is, are you fitter today? Could you defeat the old you? Every day you train, you're so much farther removed from that old person that if you compare yourself to that person, then you're going to be far better off.
That actually brings me to something else. There was something on your channel on YouTube that you said recently that I really thought was great. And we often talk about the importance of not comparing ourselves to others, but you also mentioned that it's important not to compare yourself to yourself earlier in life. And as we get older, we all
Yeah.
look back. We look back and think, man, if I was younger, when I was younger, I could do X, Y, and Z with no
Yeah.
problem. But now that I'm older, it's not the same. How often do you think that that's a mental obstacle that older grapplers run into, is comparing themselves not to others, but to their younger self?
What I see, maybe more than that, is we remember what it was like, how we could move our body and what we could do when we were younger. And we discovered jujitsu. Maybe we've been sedentary for 20 years. You're coming off the couch, coming off of a desk job. And in your mind, you're still that 20 something year old, and you just go way too hard, way too intense, and you end up getting injured sometimes. So I think sometimes you have to just assess and recognize what your body can do. And, that's difficult when you're new at jujitsu. As a white belt, you don't know your body very well. You don't understand the game very well. You don't understand, how the RPMs that you need to run your engine at to be able to finish the race. But with skill and training, you really learn your body much better, and you keep yourself safe and keep yourself within that zone. But yeah, comparisons of any kind, uh, whether it's the real world, whether it's jujitsu, they will never serve you well. I mean, sure, there are people that you're inspired by because, okay, they're at this level, you want to get to that level. But these direct comparisons where you're measuring yourself, your self-worth in terms of them, and even your self-worth in terms of what you used to be able to do, you just have to let that go.
Rick, do you think that generally speaking for older grapplers, it's more important to focus on defense overall? Because I know that everyone obviously wants to be able to submit people and express the essence of jujitsu, which is a submission. But
Yeah.
how important is it for them to really hone in on defense first, in your opinion?
Well, you're not going to have any choice. You're going to be on your back a lot. You're going to be smashed a lot. You know, you don't have the physical attributes generally. I mean, there are exceptions, but generally you don't have the physical attributes to be able to kind of impose your will in a way that lets you play more offense than defense, or stay on top more than bottom. So I think you have to accept that you're going to play defense more, which means you better get good at defending. And that's the essence of jujitsu. I look at the progression of jujitsu as kind of this pyramid, with the base being survival. That goes back to Elio Gracie. You might not win, but you didn't lose, right? That's survival. The next level up is having an effective defense. The next level up is being able to transition from defense to offense in those moments, those windows of opportunity. And then lastly, or second to last would be being able to dominate from the top. And then the last piece is the cherry on top, which is the submission. And so if you focus on the base of the pyramid early in your journey, look, it's not sexy. It's not sexy work. It's, can be a little thankless sometimes. You're just getting smashed, but you're making little epiphanies about hand positioning, elbow positioning, body positioning, uh, and staying calm, so that in those moments you can problem solve, and you can, uh, frustrate your opponents because they can't get anything on you. And I love that style of game. I mean, I'm perfectly comfortable being on the bottom. And a lot of times with those younger athletes, I'll simply ask, what's your best position? Mount. Great. Mount me. And we will start from there. Because sometimes when you start, off of the fist bump in the wild, it takes a certain amount of effort and energy and horsepower to be able to get someone on their back, and they're fighting really hard to prevent that. So a lot of times I'm perfectly happy just starting from a disadvantaged position. I'm very confident in my defense, and usually there's an opening there. They'll get frustrated, they'll have to transition to something else, or sometimes you dangle something out there. I like dangling my arms out a little bit and saying, oh, there's an arm bar there, and then they transition, and it's in that moment that I can reverse, get on top, and then hopefully make them suffer a little bit, and then work my way to a submission.
Rick, what do you think has been your biggest obstacle, your biggest recurring obstacle in your jiu-jitsu journey? What's been the hardest thing for you to really overcome?
Man, that is an interesting question. I've had some physical setbacks. I've had some injuries. So, as you get older, you can't put in the volume of training, the frequency of training that you would like. And, that's something that I've lamented, because I'm obsessed by jujitsu. I love it. And, it was a hobby for so long. Now it's something I do professionally. But, for so long, it was just this obsessive hobby. And the body doesn't let you do what you'd like to do. But I think ultimately, if I had to pick one thing, it'd probably be the ego again. Everything comes back to the ego, and keeping yourself balanced.
Do you think that your ego became harder to battle with after black belt, or do you think that it was harder before black belt?
There's more pressure when you're a black belt, because you're expected to be able to get the job done with any given role. But as you get older in jujitsu, you're simply not going to be as effective. is effective as measured by your ability to get out from disadvantaged positions, your ability to maintain top position, your ability to work yourself to a submission. Things just take a little longer. You have to be more incremental. And so as a black belt, sometimes there's this, and sometimes it's a self-imposed expectation. And again, it's the ego saying, no, I'm a black belt. And you walk into a room and you're like, I feel pressure here. And also what happens once you strap that black belt on is people look at you as the measuring stick and they come at you really hard. You're not in the mood for a hard round. You just want to be chill, but this young buck is coming at you 1,000%. And you have to just accept that, the role is going to be what the role is. And two people have some say in that. And so, you have to deal with that. But yeah, there's definitely a little more pressure, I think, as a black belt, but you got to let it go. You have to let all that go. Training is just training. Whatever happens, happens.
Yeah, that's very well said. Yeah, I recently became a black belt myself in November, and something I've been trying to tell myself more and more is that just because I'm a black belt doesn't mean I have to try to be the best guy in the room, because I can't be the best guy in the room. I'm not going to be the best guy in the room where I train. And so, so I'm trying to really, I drill it into my own mind that the black belt is just a representation that I've been around long enough.
Yeah.
I understand the art. And I have the capability of expressing it to other people that are coming up in the lower ranks. And it's not really much more than that. It's not like it's somehow you're this superhero that's undefeatable and needs to be able to crush everybody at any time. That's simply not the case. And you see the best competitors and athletes in the world in training rooms that just have kind of lazy or off days. And it's something I'm trying to tell myself more and more, but sometimes, you get the black belt, you're like, oh man, this is a huge target. Now I can't ever lose a round. It's like, no, that's not the way to look at it. I don't think.
Yeah. And ultimately, there's more injury risk and there's, And look, I'm in San Diego. I train mostly at the Clark Gracie Academy, and there's some, real killers in that room. And so, there's an expectation that, I gotta be, I gotta be in there with the black belts, representing the ways, some of these guys can in a way that I can't because they're more elite level jujitsu. But, you just have to let it go.
What are your thoughts on slowing down but never stopping? Because we hear people saying it's okay to slow down, just don't stop. How do you put that into practice?
When you get injured, you mean?
Yeah, when you get injured, or even just with age, like if life gets in the way, or if you're getting older, we hear people talk about the idea of that it's okay to slow down as long as you don't stop. Yeah. What are your thoughts on putting that into practice?
You have to distinguish between being hurt and being injured, and that can be kind of a difficult calculus, because things are sore a lot in jiu-jitsu. My hip, I trained last night and my right hip seems a little stiff, a little tight, a little jacked up today. And, there's always something. There's always the aches and pains, but sometimes it's those lingering aches and pains that then will kind of cross the threshold and you say, I need to take a little time off. And so, I've had a lot of injuries. Some of it honestly was, the way I played jiu-jitsu when I was younger was more aggressive and more dynamic, and it was a riskier style of jiu-jitsu that I don't play as much anymore. But also, I didn't see the value early in my journey with doing the strength and conditioning and the yoga and the restorative work. I loved jiu-jitsu. It bored me to go to the gym and train. And so as I'm getting older, I'm really committed to being stronger, doing resistance work every week, doing flexibility work, mobility work, restorative stuff, taking care of those aches and pains. I'm into peptides and, a lot of the things that help put us back together again. And I think that had I done that when I was younger, and not been so just hard-headed about wanting to do jiu-jitsu and nothing else, then I think I probably would have avoided some of those injuries. But as far as keeping jiu-jitsu in your life, there are many seasons in jiu-jitsu. It's a long journey with many ups and downs and twists and turns and life changes. You might have to go move it to a different city. You might have a career change. You might, whatever. So I always liken it to, you're on the wagon, you're on the jiu-jitsu wagon, and you fell off the wagon for whatever reason, you just can't let that wagon get over the hill and get so far away that you'll never catch it again. You have to kind of keep it in sight and jump back on that wagon as soon as possible. And even if it's once a week, even if it's once every 2 weeks, even if it means, I've taken extended periods off, even if it means you set goals and little mini projects when you're off the mat. Oh, I'm going to, watch these instructional courses and make notes about it. And so when I come back, I'll have some more stuff in mind that I can begin working on, that sort of thing. But yeah, it can be, most people quit everything that they ever start. I mean, how many people start playing guitar when they're young and quit? Most of them do, right? So most people that start jiu-jitsu will quit eventually, but the ones that stay, I think you need to kind of keep it into your consciousness and realize that you're not going to be tearing it up every time. You have periods of obsession. You have periods where you're not even into jiu-jitsu much at all, but you just keep chipping away, chipping away, chipping away. And then, you realize 10, 15, 20 years later that you're still at it.
Yeah. That's great. That's great advice. You mentioned there that sometimes you have periods of where you're really obsessed and into jiu-jitsu, and sometimes where you get burnt out. Have you had significant periods where you just wanted nothing to do with jiu-jitsu along the way? And if so, what did you do during those times, during those time periods?
I don't think I've ever had any period where I didn't want anything to do with jiu-jitsu. I have gone through phases. There's the blue belt blues,
Yeah.
which most of us will experience. I think of it as, when you're working toward a blue belt, it's not so far off. You can sort of see it off in the distance. But once you get your blue belt, that purple belt is mysterious. Like, how in the world are you going to get to purple belt? You don't even see it. It's so far, far down. And there will be a point in that blue belt journey where you're just coming to class and you're like, man, I'm fighting the same battle I fought yesterday, and it's the same one I fought the day before and the day before and the day before. Am I even getting any better? And you get frustrated. And so, there are those phases in the journey where you're just frustrated with jiu-jitsu and you just wonder if you're ever going to be good at it and all that. And there could be a temptation to say, nah, maybe this is not for me. I've never quite gotten to that point, but I did quit. I had 2 injuries as a purple belt that required surgery, and I quit. And I called Roy Dean up and I said, I think I'm done. I'm done. And he didn't try to talk me out of it. He knew I had to go through the stages of grief. And he just said, listen, it's okay. You had a good run. You developed some skills. You know a lot now. It's okay. But I think that was the closest I came to actually quitting. It was just because, I tore my rotator cuff and I blew a disc out of my back, and I had 2 surgeries back to back. I came back from the first one, and then 3 months later, boom, another one. I was just, the stages of grief. And in that moment, I thought I had quit.
I'll share something with you and the listeners here. I actually just got diagnosed yesterday with a pretty bad condition in my neck that's going to take me off the mats for 6 months. I just found that out.
Man.
Yes. Yeah. I just found out yesterday.
Is
so,
it a bulging disc?
Well, no, basically you have a natural curve in your neck. My neck is like straight as an arrow, and it's causing all kinds of discompression. It's causing pinched nerves. It's causing muscle and tendon strains. Basically for the last year, as I was pushing to get to my black belt, I was just pushing through a lot of pain. It was a lot of anti-inflammatories and a lot of ice and just kind of limping back to the academy the next day. But I recently hit a wall. Like, it's been really, really painful. And in the beginning of the year, as I turned my head, my whole right arm would get pins and needles. So I stopped. So I stopped at that point. But then when I came back, it's just the pain was so bad. So that made me go get it looked at. And so thankfully I don't need surgery or anything like that, but they do want me to stop for 6 months to go through physical therapy and the special treatment that they do to help kind of restore the direction of your spine or whatever. So I'm having to come to grips with that, and the fact that I'm probably going to have to change my game as well and everything. So what advice would you give to people out there listening that are in a situation like mine, where you're going to have to take some time off and there's really just no choice?
When I had my first surgery, which was a blown disc in my back, I set a goal, and my goal was to come up with a list of 1,000 techniques, all cross-referenced to YouTube videos or media that I had. And I did. That kept my head in the game. I just consumed lots and lots of jiu-jitsu media, and I kept adding things to my list, all organized. And it gave me something to focus on that wasn't the fact that, my body wasn't functioning very well. And so, yeah, I think you just have to keep your head in the game in some way. Go, watch class, continue being part of the team. When people get hurt, they tend to disappear and you don't see them for a long time. But there's immense value in just going to class, watching class. I had a student who didn't tap to a heel hook and blew his knee out, and he was really depressed. And I said, bro, I want you to keep coming to class. Just come to class. And so he'd sit on the mat with his leg brace on, and I would talk to him. And one night he goes, man, this is so good. He goes, I'm seeing all the stupid shit I used to do that I shouldn't do anymore. Like, he was seeing it from a coach's perspective and actually getting a little different viewpoint into jujitsu. So yeah, and all our friends are there. That's where all our friends hang out and all that. So if you just abandon that and it's just out of your consciousness, then that's not going to be conducive to you really coming back very well. So yeah, just keep your head in the game, I think would be my advice.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, that's something I've been thinking. I've been thinking I could just, study and reassess my game. And, it's too bad there's not like a platform online where I could be studying instructionals.
Right. Right. I assume that's a perk of you doing this. You probably have access to everything, right? Oh man.
They take care of me. Yeah, they take care of
Oh
me. So
man.
yes, it's been pretty cool. But yeah, man, it's going to be painful being out for 6 months. But at the very least, I think that yeah, watching instructionals and thankfully I've been cleared to like lift weights and things like that. So I'll remain active. I'll try to come back in better shape than I left, and hopefully with some new knowledge from stuff I watch. So we'll see.
I'm uh, I've taken so I'm training, but I'm not rolling right now for the last couple weeks, and I have a neck issue as well, so I can relate to that. And I have my iron neck, and I've been doing my my halos and trying to strengthen. We don't think about our neck as being a muscle that you need to strengthen. We want biceps and pecs, but the neck, people are cranking on it, and I've been choked so many times that I've got some issues with my neck as well. And so I'm kind of on this strengthening program right now to see if that's the cure for it. So hopefully you can get through it and, you know, come through it better. And yeah, if you need to modify your game, that's part of the game too, is okay, I can't do, I can't invert, I can't do the things I used to do. The beautiful thing about jujitsu is there are always answers. There are always answers if you're willing to seek them out and find them. You can be older and still be effective. You can, whatever your physical limitations are, there are ways to play jujitsu that allow you to continue to be effective despite that. So I'm sure you'll emerge, better and find a new way to play jujitsu that really is probably going to be something you hadn't anticipated.
I appreciate that. Well, thank you, Rick. Yeah, I certainly hope so. And that's actually an interesting topic to dive into also, like the idea of redesigning your game later in the journey. Because like I said, I'm going to have to come to grips with the fact that I'm probably going to have to change the way I play guard for sure. I invert my guard a lot for retention and also for like leg entries and attacks that I like to do. But also, I've also got this condition in my foot called hallux rigidus. It's basically like it's like arthritis in your big toe joint. So I can't bend my toe back more than 45 degrees anymore. So that's
Oh,
made I've had to completely redesign the way I play my takedown game, which for the last 15 years has been centered around like freestyle wrestling shots and things like that. Because
yeah.
I can't drop levels and bend my toe back like that anymore. So I'm trying to explore more like judo and Greco style play on the feet. I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the idea of like training jujitsu for a long time and then due to your body's limitations and needing to redesign your game for something more viable.
Yeah, I think everyone is going to have to evolve their game certainly as they get older. That's one issue is that the way you play when you're younger is not going to be the way you play when you're older. But yeah, injuries bring realities that we have to contend with, and we either figure it out and figure out a way around that, or we're going to be really limited. And again, like I just said, there are always answers. There's so many ways to play jujitsu, and I don't really invert. I can invert, and I like to do that stuff. I like all those leg entries, and I love that stuff actually. But it just gets riskier and riskier, and so I find myself trying to figure out how can I play kind of my same game but modify it in a way that doesn't put me at that risk. So if there's a leg entry, like let's say you do the false reap in order to expose for the the cross ashi. Let's say, well, normally you would invert under that, but there are ways to do that where you're not inverting. You're just using it kind of as a sweeping position. And so that's where kind of my mind goes. It's like, okay, I love this. I love this setup. Is there a way to modify it to work with my new reality? So, that's probably what I would encourage you to do. Don't abandon your game. Just look to modify it in new and novel ways. And my girlfriend has a similar thing with her toe like that. And, she sees me doing planks on my toes and downward dog, upward dog, all that kind of stuff. And she's like, man, that just hurts. She can't do that. So yeah, I can relate to that.
No, I really appreciate that advice. I actually really like what you said there. The idea of not necessarily scrapping your old game, but just trying to reinvent new ways to use it that aren't as risky. That's something I wasn't, because I was thinking in my head, I'm going to have to like completely abandon the guard I play. I might have to jump into half guard and be like a half guard obsessed kind of guy now. But yeah, maybe there are ways to still play what I do, just in a slightly modified way. I'm glad you said that.
And then you might end up innovating some things that are unique to you and the way that you think and play jiu-jitsu.
It's funny you say that. There's actually, I've had a couple conversations on the show. One was with Pedro Sauer and the other was with Gordo. And both of them, it's two of their main things that they do. One of the main things that each of them do. Pedro Sauer is known for his bully pass that he does to open close guard. And Gordo's obviously known as the half guard. Yeah. And Gordo in particular was explaining that the whole way he found half guard was because he injured his knee. He couldn't quite play close guard the same way because of his knee injury. And it was just less pressure on his knee for the particular injury that he had to go into a half guard thing. And that's when he started creating these sweeps and these transitions. And now half guard is kind of what we know it as today, because a lot of the work that he put in on that. So yeah, who knows? I mean, it's what you said is very true. There have been many case examples of people, having an injury, forced to not play the way they did before, and then reinvent something completely different. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, good luck to you. I'll be curious to hear. I'm sure along your journey you'll talk about it a little bit on your podcast, I assume.
I will. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I appreciate the insight for sure. Rick, I'll tell you what, man, we've reached the point where I always play a game with my guest. It's a game called the Pummel. The Pummel's basically a series of random questions. Some of these are about jiu-jitsu. Some of them have nothing to do with jiu-jitsu. But if you'd like to play the Pummel, I'd love to play this game with you.
Let's do it.
All right, man. Now, the first question I've always been asking is, what do you think is the largest animal that you could beat in hand-to-hand combat? But right now, I'm going to ask you that question, but I'm going to ask you a new one, because right now there's a trending thing on the internet that I'm sure you've seen. It's the debate of whether or not 100 men unarmed could defeat a gorilla. So what are your thoughts on the 100 unarmed men versus a gorilla? Who do you think wins?
There are a bunch of ways to look at that, that question in and of itself doesn't tell you anything. Are you fighting him in a small pen? Are you fighting the gorilla in a big pen where you can run more strategy and that sort of thing? But I think if you look at, it's just basic physics. A gorilla weighs 500 pounds and they have quantifiable strength, incredible strength, right? But if you take 100 average size guys, or 160 pounds, let's say, times 100, that's 16,000 pounds versus 500 pounds. And so I think the odds are on the human side, assuming they have the strength and resilience and mental fortitude to actually go in there and get the job done. Sort of depends on who you're sending in there. If it's, a bunch of UFC fighters, okay, that's one thing. If it's a bunch of, overweight guys coming off their couch, that might not be, the same outcome.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I assume a certain percentage of the 100 guys would have to just be used as fodder. Like they'd have to be kind of sacrifice. For sure. Yeah. Then I guess you'd have to look at it as a battle of attrition for the gorilla. You'd have to wear it down enough to where it, because the gorilla, as big as they are, they can get tired and exhausted just like anything.
Yeah, and that might not take that long actually. They're not endurance animals. Yeah,
that's true. That's true. Yeah, they mostly control and have they're real territorial of a specific sized area that they don't really leave. So that's a good point too. Yeah. But then as far as finishing the job, I'm thinking I just had Hanato Canuto on the show. We were talking about how he thought the choke would be the only way, because if you've ever seen a gorilla's skull on an x-ray, it's like a cinder block. It looks nothing like our skull. Like you're not going to cave that thing in. So it'd have to be a choke, I think. But
I mean, it probably has like a 22-inch neck though. So it's, I think even actually locking up
40. Yeah. We looked it up in the middle of the conversation. I was like, oh, how big is a gorilla's neck? So you'd have to have a long armed guy.
Yeah. Choke might be tough. I don't know, wear it down and just, keep pummeling it until it's dead, I guess.
That's the only option, right? It's a hard one. It's a hard one. Even because, yeah, it's funny because even if you air quotes win, it's like, okay, well, how do you know, eventually he's going to wake up and kill us all.
Yeah.
It's fun. It's a funny thought. It's a funny thought. Now, back to the first question I always ask, what's the largest animal you think you could beat in hand-to-hand combat?
I mean, animals pound for pound are so much stronger than humans. I mean, we're pretty wimpy, all things considered. I had a dog that was a small dog, but man, he was so strong. Even small animals can be really strong. So probably a Cocker Spaniel.
Cocker Spaniel. That's good. That's a very realistic. There's a lot. We have one listener in particular. Shout out to Walter, who's very, very a big fan of the questions, but always very matter of fact as far as how people answer. Like if someone says, "Oh, I could beat like a wolf," he'll send me all this documentation about wolves and how big they are and their bite, their pounds per pressure and their bite, and argue with me like, "Dude, there's no way this guy'd beat a wolf." A Cocker Spaniel, I think, is realistic. That's a realistic.
Or if you took in size, I mean, like let's say a condor, some bird with an 8-foot wingspan or something like that. I mean, sure, there are bigger animals that are not particularly strong. Maybe something like that, of course.
Yeah.
But most mammals and land-dwelling creatures, I mean, they're pretty pound for pound. They're pretty tough.
Yeah. Our advantage is for sure technology. Without technology or weapons or anything like that, we're not. Yeah, thank God we had all that, because otherwise we wouldn't have made it this far, I don't think. Okay, let me ask you another question here. So let's say you find a genie lamp. The normal genie rules apply. You get 3 wishes. You can't kill anybody. You can't wish for more wishes. What do you think would be your 3 wishes you'd ask for?
Well, one of the wishes for sure is I would look, I don't mind being the age I am, but I wish that I could have all of the joints in my body, in my spine, all of that connective tissue completely, made youthful again. And so I think I would ask for something like that, where my organs, everything on the inside is that of a 20-year-old. I can keep my brain, I can still look the way I look. Everything's the same. So that would definitely be one thing that I would wish for.
That's a good one.
Do I have to come up with all 3?
You got 2 more. Yeah, 2 more wishes.
2 more. Okay. Second wish. Well, resources, so you can retire in style. So I'd probably wish for some resources like that.
That's a good one.
And, to share with my kids and, give them a quality of life. And I don't know what the third one would be. It's funny, when I worked on Family Guy, he found a genie. And one of the things he wished for, he says, "I wish for my own theme song." And so everywhere he walked, this music would be playing.
I remember that.
And then he gets into a fight. He gets into a fight and he goes, "I wish I didn't have any bones." And then he's like,
it's just like a blob.
Like blob. Peter, blob. So, I don't know. I'd probably have to think about that a little bit. You wouldn't want to squander.
No. You keep that one in your back pocket. Yeah.
I mean, world peace,
There you go. That's a good one.
Maybe it doesn't have to be me. Maybe it's, fixing the world.
That's a good one. I like, those are 3 excellent wishes. I like those for sure. Speaking of Family Guy, I'm a huge Family Guy fan. How did you end up with that gig? How did you end up working with Family Guy? And how long did that last? You said it was 3, because I remember it was 3 seasons and then they got canceled, but then they got huge after they released DVDs. And that's what made Fox bring them back. Cause that was How did you get that gig? Cause that's pretty cool.
I was at that point, I was a freelance audio engineer. And I wasn't looking for a regular gig. I had done some work in Japan. I was going to Europe. I was, I was a busy audio engineer doing really cool stuff. But a friend of mine had a connection there. He had actually gotten hired on that show. And he said, "Man, they're looking for someone. They're looking for someone. This would be perfect for you. Come on in." And so then when I realized what the pay was, which in those days, this is back in the late 90s, it was $2,000 a week, plus incredible health insurance, plus incredible retirement, plus they feed you every day. And
wow.
And I thought, okay, maybe I could. And the hours were really mellow. It was like 10 a.m. to 3 in the afternoon. We would just work.
It's a good gig.
Kind of super great gig. So I took it. I ended up taking it, and it did get canceled after season 3. And I moved to Oregon. What's funny is a year later, they called me. They said, "Hey, we're getting the old team back together. You want to come back?" And had I still been living in Los Angeles, I think I would have done it. And I'd probably still be there today because it's still a thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just sort of fell into it, and it was fun. As my background in music, I wasn't, I was the dialogue editor on that show, and I recorded all the dialogue. And so, all the characters would come into the studio, and I'd record them, and then I'd sit with Seth, and we would edit the show, get the timing right on the show, and all that. And so I got a chance to see Seth transform from this little nerdy guy with thick glasses, and he would stutter, and he was very awkward, socially awkward. I watched him sort of transform himself during that time to, he had a girlfriend of his encouraged him to get a new wardrobe, and he cut his hair, and he did all that stuff. So I kind of watched the evolution of Seth from the early days to later. But he started leaning on me a little bit because of my musical background. Like when he would sing those campy songs and stuff, a lot of times it would just be me and him in the studio, just doing those. And I'd help produce those segments and stuff. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. But that's a long time ago now.
That's pretty cool though. That's really good. Yeah, Seth MacFarlane has a really good voice, man. He's like big into
Oh, incredible.
musicals and things like that. He sung the intro. One of my favorite shows ever is Futurama. And he actually sung the intro song to one of the Futurama straight to DVD movies. And
Yeah.
it sounds just like Sinatra. Like he's got a really, really good voice. Yeah. So that must
Yeah,
be
he
pretty
was
cool.
blessed with a great voice, and the ability to just create characters and all that. Like very, very talented.
That's really cool. That's awesome. Well, let me ask you this. So have you ever had a supernatural experience?
I don't know. I mean, no, I'm gonna say no. I'm trying to go back. I mean, we go through periods in life where sometimes you feel a connection with the divine or that sort of thing, but nothing that I would call like definitively a supernatural experience. Like I didn't, see an entity or, whatever, anything that I can think of. No. So I'd answer no.
Oh, no alien abductions, no nothing
No
like
alien
that.
abductions. No.
Okay. Do you have any tattoos?
I do. Yeah.
What's your Oh, cool. What's your first and favorite tattoo?
Well, all my tattoos happened simultaneously. A friend of mine who was a tattoo artist, uh, he flew into town and he stayed at my house, and I made a deal with him, and I said, "Hey, would you tattoo me?" And so we did like 9 hours on my arm in one day, which was ridiculous. I was going into shock by the end.
That's a lot.
And
Yeah.
then the next day he did a couple other things on me. So yeah, I mean, probably my favorite is the one that's on my back, which is, kanji. It's jujitsu and budo and some of those things. And
What do you think is the worst job that you ever had in your life?
I've had a bunch of jobs. I had a job. It was a company that would go into buildings after there was a fire, and they would salvage mostly tools
Oh,
and
wow.
machinery and all that. And so it involved going into these old buildings, digging through the rubble, and then taking these tools and coating them with grease so they wouldn't rust further, and throwing them in a box. So I did that for a while, and I mean, I've done a few things that weren't particularly great, but nothing too horrible, honestly.
That's cool. That's cool. What do you think is a secret talent that you have?
A secret talent. I mean, I think all my talents are pretty public.
Yeah.
um,
No hidden skills. Like, are you a good cook or anything like that? Anything
No,
that
I
people
do.
might not know?
What's funny is I never, in my past, I got divorced a few years ago, and in my current relationship, food is a big part of our, we love to cook together and to do that. And I realized that I do have some talent for it. And she's very chaotic in the kitchen, the way she approaches it, and I'm very methodical, and so it's an interesting combination there.
That's cool. That's awesome. What's something that outside of martial arts that you wish you could be better at?
I'm a musician at heart, but I haven't really played music in so many years. And that was my first love. I started playing when I was young, but I wasn't nearly as disciplined as I wish I had been. I didn't ever get as great as a musician as I wish I could have or would have been able to had I been more disciplined and really put the time in and committed to practicing. So probably being better at playing guitar. I'm decent, but I'd love to be exceptional.
Nice. Nice. Yeah, that's actually something I'm hoping that with this 6 month layoff I'm having. I'm going to try to maybe pick up guitar lessons. I've been learning guitar for like 30 years now, so
Yeah.
I want to try it, and I'm just as good today as I was the first time I ever picked one up. So I have not evolved at all on the guitar. So I'm going to try to do that myself. But yeah, I think music is a great outlet. It's a great artistic outlet to have, and it's a cool skill.
Mhm.
What do you think what's your favorite bad food to eat? Favorite junk food?
Favorite junk food? Man, like probably pizza, ice cream, burgers. And burgers aren't necessarily bad, depending on what you eat with them. Uh, what else? I mean, I have a sweet tooth, and I try to suppress it and not indulge too much, but definitely sweets, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Nice. Well, what's your most hated food? What's something you cannot eat no matter what?
Boiled eggs. I love eggs when they're scrambled. If the two components are separate, I can't do it.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Hard boiled eggs. Can't
hard
do
boiled eggs. Can't do it.
it. What do you think was the scariest moment of your life?
Mm. Well, probably the scariest moment was not mine necessarily. It was in my past relationship. Uh, my ex-wife had a bowel obstruction that came on just suddenly. She was going to a show,
Oh my God.
and next thing you know, her intestine had gotten twisted on itself, and she had to have emergency surgery. And so that was kind of a scary moment
Oh my
in our life.
God. Wow.
Um, I've lived a pretty easy life, I have to say, in terms of not having anything really truly bad happen to me. So uh, nothing too scary out there.
That's good. That's a good thing. And I'm glad that your ex-wife is okay. That's definitely a scary situation for sure. Well, who do you think is your favorite grappler of all time?
Marcelo Garcia.
Good choice. Good choice. How about your favorite MMA fighter?
Different periods of time. I'm Fedor back in the day, and during the Pride days, I was a huge Fedor Emelianenko fan. Anderson Silva, huge fan during his run. Uh, Conor McGregor was always fun, super fun back in his heyday. So I think it's more who do I like during different periods of time.
That's a true fan's way to answer that question. I like that. That's good. What do you think is your biggest phobia?
Heights, probably.
Heights. Yeah, you
I
fear
mean,
heights.
it's selective. I used to mountain bike, and we would go to Big Bear in the summer months, and they hang your bike on the ski lift and then take you up the mountain. And something happened on one of those trips where all of a sudden I was just utterly terrified, and I had to close my eyes, and my friends were taunting me and trying to, jiggle the thing. And
Oh,
ever since then, I have this weird phobia. I can't get on ski lifts. I can't get on like gondolas and all that stuff. I did the tram in Las Vegas or in Palm Springs. There's a little tram that goes from Palm Springs up to about like 6,000 feet or something up the mountain. People don't realize that you can do that. You can go from being in the desert to being in the snow on one tram ride. And I did that one year, and I had to crouch and huddle in the middle of it just with my eyes closed. But if I'm under control, like I can scale something. If I'm under control, I have no problem with heights. So it's a weird selective phobia that I have.
no, I understand that. I think that's a common, yeah, having lack of control. If the heights are being if the heights are being controlled by someone else, that's
Okay.
definitely, yeah, it's definitely a scarier thing for sure. What do you think is your favorite? Who do you think is your favorite superhero?
I like the superheroes that it's not innate.
Mm, yeah.
So they've had to, like Batman or something, they've had to turn themselves into superheroes, because I think to me, it sort of says, hey, we can all become superheroes if we were willing to do the work to acquire the skill necessary to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's good. So like your Batman's, Iron Man's,
Iron Man, right?
yeah, stuff like that. That's cool. That's cool. If you could have a superpower, what would you choose?
Probably invisibility.
That's a good one.
I
That's a
mean,
good
how
one.
cool would that be to be able to sneak around and
Yeah.
see what's
Yeah.
really going on in the world, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Plus, a great way to have to do what they call the Irish goodbye, where you just kind of slip out of a party and don't say bye to anybody. You can just poof.
Right. Just poof,
If you
there you
anywhere
go.
you don't want to be or don't want to hang out anymore, you just go invisible and walk out.
Right, right.
What do you think is your biggest pet peeve?
Hmm. Man, you're asking me all these questions that I don't have. I'd have to think about it. I don't know that I have. Oh, I'll tell you one. Yeah,
Sure. Yeah.
actually,
Yeah.
I do have one, and it's so
Okay.
weird and minor.
Okay.
So you go to a store, and this is if you pay cash. They always hand you the money by putting the bills in your hand and then sometimes the receipt and then the change on top. And I'm always thinking the order of operations is reversed because what do you have to do now? I have to deconstruct this thing. I have to take the coins and do something, and I have to do what they need to do is put the coins in the hand first and then the paper. And now you can manipulate it way easier.
That's 100. We got to start a petition, man. 100%. You're absolutely right. Yeah, I don't need a paperweight that's going to spill everywhere else. I'm trying to get all my receipts and bills out from underneath it. That's definitely annoying. Rick, final question for the Pummel game, sir. If martial arts didn't exist, what do you think you'd be doing with your life instead?
I'd probably still be in tech. Ultimately, my tech company, it was very successful for many years. It grew to have 30 employees and was very successful. But the internet goes through many phases. There's been various waves during the internet. And in the early days when I started that company, we didn't have hardly any competition, and it was easy to market things, and it was it was very easy to grow this company. But eventually, it became insanely competitive, and so it was just much more difficult. So ultimately, that company failed, and that sort of forced me to pivot. I couldn't go back into tech; I was so burnt out, and that I pivoted, and I'm doing what I'm doing now as a result of that. But had I not discovered jujitsu, I'd probably still be in tech or in audio, or pursuing one of my first loves in that way.
That's excellent. I love that. Well, Rick, that was the final question for the Pummel.
Did
Congratulations,
I
you
pass? Did I
win.
pass?
Yeah, you got your double underhooks, brother. You win.
Okay.
Rick, let me ask you, man, when you're approaching a role with a young athletic, say 22-year-old, take me inside your mind. Like, what are you usually thinking? What are your goals? What's the destination?
To me, rolling is dynamic meditation. And really the best roles are when your mind is kind of disconnected. Um, you're not trying to necessarily impose your will. You're just sort of, and I'm a bit of a counterpuncher as well. I prefer to just feel you and feel what you're trying to do and react to that, and then the opportunities always emerge from that. And so I don't feel like my game is significantly different when I go up against someone younger or someone older. Someone younger and more dynamic, I'm certainly more conscious of some safety issues. I'm like, I got to stay tight. I can't be real explosive and risk things. Sometimes those guys can, they can be clumsy, and sometimes they're not as in control. And so yeah, safety is always a big thing, but safety is something that I'm always conscious of, and that's what I preach to the older athletes: safety first. You have to live to fight another day. And then with those young bucks, I'm not going to try to match their pace, their speed, their strength, any of those things. And so I prefer to try to play a craftier game and see if I can get some exposures and get to where I'd like to be in terms of my top game, and being dominant through finding those pockets and those windows of opportunity more so. But I don't think my game changes a whole lot depending, from partner to partner.
That's great. Yeah. What are your thoughts on like ways to hit the brakes on younger and more athletic opponents? Like, are there any particular go-to positions that you think are really
Yeah.
good for snagging somebody up and slowing things down?
Yeah. Well, it's all about connection, right? How do you slow down someone bigger, stronger, faster? Well, you do it by attaching yourself to them. So usually the first goal is to get attached. And that's a really deep subject. There are different ways to think about attachment depending on the position that you're playing. But I think as an advanced practitioner, generally the goal is to apply pressure. And that pressure can come from anywhere. You can apply pressure from the bottom, you can apply pressure from the top. We think of pressure as something from the top, but you can apply pressure just by your leg connections, the way you're pulling and pushing and holding and gripping. And so, yeah, I think connecting yourself to an opponent so that they cannot move freely, and then being able to change your relative speed. Uh, you can't necessarily stop them completely, but you can change the relative speed at which you operate so that you can advance to the next point in that continuum that you're trying to get to through your attachments and your positioning. But if I really want to cook someone, generally, I have most success from side control doing that, because I like over wraps and under wraps and getting, kind of behind the spine, right below the sternum, and then putting my rib cage into their sternum and turning the head away and doing all the things that I do to sort of smash someone and to limit their breathing. And I've taught some of those things at my camps. I will teach a lot of that kind of old man jiu-jitsu stuff, where you're just kind of smashing and in intelligent ways that kind of deplete their tank.
For the 40 and up crowd that are starting now and they want to develop their own system, what are the important pieces that they should have in place, in your opinion? Give us some insight on how to create a system in the first place.
Well, you have to start with the fundamentals. If you're new at jiu-jitsu, you have to learn all of the basics. You have to learn how to escape side control, how to pass the guard, how to escape the back, how to do all the basic stuff. And that's a deep field of study. So the personalization, to me, that's more the mid blue into purple belt kind of and beyond, that sort of personalization, because you need to have enough elements. It's sort of like if you're, back to cooking, if you're a chef, you have to know the spice rack, you have to know your proteins, you have to know the ingredients. If you're coming into it as a newbie and you don't even know the proteins and the spice rack and all that, well, you're not going to be able to really assemble a unique game to you, certainly. It's in the exploration and the mastery of those elements that then you find what you like to do, what works for your body type. That said, usually there's something that every white belt will find. Maybe it's an arm bar, maybe it's a pass, an escape, it's something. And that becomes sort of the core of your game. And eventually you'll start adding more components to that, and you'll create the connective tissue between those positions and those techniques. And now you're sort of flow charting out a game that's sort of unique to you. It's your expression of jiu-jitsu. Even though we're all using the same ingredients, it's your assembly of that is what makes it unique to you. And that can start early on, certainly. But I don't think that you really find your game until you're, right around purple belt, probably.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I definitely agree with you on that for sure. And for everyone out there listening, if you're listening, if you guys are 40 and older starting jiu-jitsu and you're looking to get the pieces in place to start building a system and building a game like Rick's describing, Rick has a great instructional with us here at Fanatics. In fact, it's one of our best sellers. It's called BJJ Old Man Style. It's available right now at bjjfanatics.com. So again, if you guys are in that age group, jump on that one. It's a great place to start and start understanding how to lay things out so that you have a system to build from.
Yeah, that instructional was really just a glimpse into my game. I sort of wandered through all the various positions, some takedowns, various things, and kind of showed how I approach jiu-jitsu and sort of my mindset and the ways that I do it. And I was a pretty new black belt when I came out with that, 5 years ago or whenever I did it. I'm actually sketching out, I'm outlining out a new course as we speak that is sort of a more mature version of where I was at there. And so, yeah, maybe we'll put it on the platform as well.
Oh, that's great. Well, yeah, as soon as that's on, we'll have you on again to talk about it. That'll be awesome.
Mhm.
Rick, there's something I wanted to circle back before we go. You were talking about that. You mentioned peptides is something that's been helping you along the way, and that's something I've heard a lot of people talking about. So many people have been praising peptides. Tell us about that for people that don't even know what they are. Would you mind breaking down what they are and then your experience and how they've helped you?
Well, peptides are something that your body naturally produces. There are something like 700 peptides in your body, and they're bioregulators. They are substances that cause your body to do something, some repair, some restorative process, repairing tissue repair. Um, they interact with hormones. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff that peptides do. Well, someone figured out that you could create, peptide. You take peptides exogenously, which gives you more of the effect of that thing that you would get. And so there are a bunch of peptides on the market now. I've barely scratched the surface on them. The big two seem to be BPC 157 and TB 500, and a lot of people are doing that particular stack. That stack produces something called angiogenesis, which is the formation of blood carrying structures. Let's say you injure a tendon, there's not much blood supply to it, and what that needs is blood in order to stimulate the healing. And so what the peptide does is it causes your body to create more of those structures that carry blood to the affected areas. And I'm about to start another round of BPC. I've done it several times in the past, and I've had some good success. I dislocated my clavicle a year and a half ago, and I was stuck, man. I had nerve pain in my neck, and my range of motion was poor, and I had taken about 3 months off from being on the mat as a result of it. And I went on a 30-day cycle of BPC and TB 500, which operates that TB 500 doesn't create angiogenesis, but it's a complementary peptide that helps stimulate recovery. And during that month, I was able to regain enough range of motion to begin training again. And so it's a little anecdotal. It's subjective. Can't prove that the BPC is what helped me. Also, my girlfriend broke her foot, and we're supposed to go to my son's wedding 6 weeks later, and it was going to be this big party with dancing and all this stuff. And she said, I'm going to be on the dance floor in 6 weeks. And so I started injecting her with BPC. And sure enough, in 6 weeks, she was dancing on the dance floor, not 100% healed, but good enough that she could. So I've had good success with it. I'm about to do another round of it for this little issue in my neck. I've also experimented with ipamorelin, which is another peptide, and CJC 1295, and I think one or two others. And those particular peptides, they stimulate the production of growth hormone. As you get older, we lose our ability to produce growth hormone, and growth hormone is good for tissue repair, for muscle development, for recovery, for all those things. And so I've done a couple cycles of that. And you usually notice, at least with me, I notice a difference for a couple weeks. You kind of feel like, oh, I feel like I can push a little harder in the gym. I feel like I'm recovering better. But then it sort of becomes the new normal, and you don't really notice anything. But there's peptides for hair loss. There's peptides for all sorts of things.
That's incredible. Yeah, I'm definitely going to look into that. I'm going to see if there's something that can directly help me with my neck. Because, wow, if your girlfriend broke her foot and was dancing in 6 weeks, that's hopefully that's a.
Now it wasn't a displaced. It was a break all the way through the foot, but it didn't displace. So she didn't need a cast. Had she gotten a bolt in her foot or something, she probably wouldn't have been dancing.
Sure.
But it still was pretty fast. And again, it's a little anecdotal, a little subjective. Did it really work? We have no way of knowing, but it seemed like it did.
Yeah, well, I have heard a lot of people praising peptides. So when you mentioned it, I was curious what your experience was. I appreciate you sharing that, because it's something I've been wanting to look into and consider as an option. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely, for sure. If you've got some stuff going on in your neck, and it's just one of those things where once or twice a year, just as sort of maintenance to kind of deal with some of those lingering aches and pains. There's some theoretical risk with BPC because, again, it creates these blood carrying structures that if you have cancer cells in your body, that it could cause them to grow more. There are millions of people doing peptides now, and I'm just not hearing of that happening. And again, it's a little subjective. We don't really know, but everything has some level of risk, but it seems to be minimal.
Yeah. Obviously, there's no magic pill for anything, but I guess if the risk seems low enough and it seems like it's going to help me, that's something I'm definitely interested in. So I appreciate the info.
I assume you could get them in Brazil.
Probably, yeah. I'd have to research what the correct sources to get them from would be here, but probably they probably have them here too. Rick, let me ask you, man, in closing, what are some of your major goals for 2025? What are some things you hope to accomplish this year?
Well, last year I started this little brand called Old Grappler Summit, which is an over 40 gathering. It was a little idea I had, And I didn't know if anybody would be interested in it. I just, I planned the event and I threw it out there online and I said, hey, if anyone wants to come to San Diego for a 3-day training event, and we're going to throw a party and have a social gathering, and come on out. And it sold out very, very quickly. Since then, we've done 3 of them and they've all sold out. They keep getting a little bit bigger. Those have not been all inclusive, meaning people come to San Diego, they get their own hotel room, they have to feed themselves and so on. So it's mostly just a ticket for the training and a ticket to the social gathering. But for this next one in October, we are definitely going bigger with it. We found this beautiful 240-acre retreat center in the mountains near San Diego. Gorgeous facility. It's very high-end retreat center. And I'm bringing in 3,000 square feet of mats under a tent that we're going to put up. Clark Gracie will be one of the instructors there. Roy Dean will be an instructor there. Miles Lucas will be there. I'm one of the instructors. And we've got a bunch of other stuff that we're working out. It's not completely planned, all the activities and everything, but there's going to be a lot happening. So that's really what I'm focused right now, is selling that thing, because I'm on the hook for a lot of money to pull this off. Because as you can imagine, a big retreat center is not an inexpensive thing to book out. But we're doing good. It's on track, and it's going to be in October, end of October here in San Diego. And for your listeners, it just occurred to me, I should create a coupon code. Maybe we'll do a coupon code, Ryan Ford. It'll be your name. And if you go to oldgrapplersummit.com, you can get all the information on the retreat. And then if you punch in the coupon code Ryan Ford, you'll get $100 off. And that would be great. The thing about these events, for a lot of us older athletes, you feel like you're a little alone in this journey because you might be the oldest person at your gym. Now, it's, the demographics are definitely shifting older, whether it's people that started 20 years ago or people that are just discovering it. So there's more older athletes for sure. But generally, once, you're in your 40s, late 40s, 50s, you're going to be one of the oldest people at your school. And a lot of times your ability to measure your skill level is difficult because you're going against guys that are 20 years younger than you. And so probably the best thing beyond getting techniques and strategies and, improving your game is the fact that you're in a room full of people that are going through the same stuff that you're going through. And so it's that camaraderie that, we lick our wounds together. We commiserate on all the trials and tribulations of being older athletes. And, some of the guys have told me, they're like, man, being able to roll with a bunch of guys my age and to see that I'm good, I'm doing, my belt holds up in this room in a way that's difficult when my training partners are 28 years old. So, that's probably the best reason to come out. And San Diego is gorgeous. The weather's usually phenomenal and we have a great time. So yeah, let's, if you want to go to oldgrapplersummit.com, we would absolutely welcome you being a participant.
That is awesome. That sounds like a really cool event. I do appreciate you offering a discount to our listeners. That was really cool.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. I wish you great success with the event. It sounds like it's going to be a really cool thing to be involved with. So
thank you. Yeah, we're having a ton of fun with it. And my goal eventually is to maybe have two a year, one West Coast, one East Coast, maybe one's in Miami and one's in San Diego, or I'm exploring some ideas of doing one in Europe and doing other places. So this could become a thing. It might be a brand that kind of, grows and is able to have events all over the world, which would be amazing.
That is awesome. Well, man, congratulations. I wish you great success with it. That's really cool. That's really cool.
Thank you.
Well, folks, unfortunately, we're fresh out of time. Rick, I've really enjoyed this conversation, my friend. I appreciate you taking the time to be here. Thanks for lending so much insight and knowledge. And I'd love to have you back in the future to talk again. You're welcome back anytime.
Oh, thank you, Ryan. It would be absolutely my pleasure anytime.
Excellent. Excellent. For anyone out there that wants to keep up with Rick, it's real easy to do so. He's active on social media. It's Rick Ellis on Facebook. Rick Ellis HQ is his Instagram handle. You guys can find him on YouTube, The Art of Skill. It's a phenomenal channel. Make sure you guys subscribe and hit the little bell icon to get notified when he adds new content. His website is rickellis.com. That's a great place to keep up with all things he's got going on. And then again, guys, as we mentioned, in the end of October, he's going to have his third Old Grapplers Summit going on in San Diego. If you guys go to oldgrapplersummit.com and use the coupon code Ryan Ford, you guys will save some money and you'll have a great time for sure. It sounds like a really awesome event. If you can't make it to San Diego, you can learn from Rick anywhere in the world here at BJJFanatics.com. He's got one of our best-selling instructionals is his instructional BJJ Old Man Style, which is available right now. So head over to BJJFanatics.com and check that out. And that's going to do it for this episode, everybody. I really appreciate you tuning in. Please stay tuned for the next episode of the BJJ Fanatics podcast.